Good afternoon. So, I am Pastor Ian with Spirit Life Church, and I am the one privileged to get to address the questions for this week. I am so grateful that Othniel pushed off such a wonderful question from last week for me. I'm just kidding, OJ. I know you were out of time, but still, we have some awesome questions that we're going to be addressing this week. So, we have three main questions. You guys are welcome to engage through the chat, and if you have additional questions, you can post them there. If we have time, we will gladly address them. We'll gladly take care of those today. So the first question that we're going to be looking at is, did Jesus go to hell after he died? So there's one for you. The next one is, if God is all perfect, could God have created a world without evil? And then the last one is, why does evil exist? These are some very insightful and thoughtful questions. They're ones that a lot of people ask. Honestly, when we come to the faith, especially the questions on evil and evil in the world, understanding those, that's a big part of reconciling. Is there a God? Is there not a God? That's why it's such a staple in apologetics. And so we're going to go ahead and start off with question one. Did Jesus go to hell after he died? So, in looking at this, there's several things that we need to consider, okay? And we're going to go ahead and look at some scripture as we go through this, just so people have a good, solid understanding of what it is, I guess, where the confusion comes from and why this concept even came about. So, first of all, it was Yelena, I believe it was, who asked this question in the comments last week. She had also asked if Jesus' suffering in Psalm 88, if that was talking about Jesus' suffering. So just real quickly, I do want to touch on that just to kind of comment on it. And I do fully believe that Psalm 88 is pertaining to Jesus' suffering at the cross, and both in the burial and resurrection. So Psalm 88, starting at 88:2. Listen to my prayer. Pay attention to my cry for help, for my life is filled with troubles and I am ready to enter Sheol. So right there, we do see and we'll get into this, but there is a reference to Sheol, and it's not hell in this translation. There is a very big difference between Sheol, Hades, which Sheol is the Hebrew, Hades is the Greek, and they're the same place, and hell. So we'll get into that here in a minute. They treat me like those who descend into the grave. I am like a helpless man, adrift among the dead, like corpses lying in a grave, whom you remember no more, and who are cut off from your prayer. So we know Jesus was cut off, that he was, he became he bore the full weight of sin for us, right? You placed me in the lowest regions of the pit, in the dark places, in the watery depths. Your anger bears down on me, and you overwhelm me with all of your waves. So right there, we know that God's anger and judgment was poured out on him instead of us, in place of us. 88:8. You cause those who know me to keep their distance. You make me an appalling sight to them. I am trapped and cannot be freed. Now we know in Isaiah it says that he was marred beyond worse than any human being. Like, it actually says any human that's ever lived. He was disfigured, and he was an appalling sight to them at that point. We also know that, and it says it later on at the end of Psalm 88, that they keep their distance. We know that the disciples pulled back. They didn't go with him. Well, with the exception of John was with him every step of the way. Wonder why he's called the beloved. And we do see Peter there, but still keeping his distance. Psalm 88:9. My eyes grow weak because of oppression. I call out to you, O Lord, all day long. I spread out my hands in prayer to you. Do you accomplish amazing things for the dead? Do the departed spirits rise up and give you thanks? Now, again, did Jesus go to hell? Well, we know he descended, and we're going to cover that. But this is prophesying the fact that he's not only going to descend, but he's also going to ascend. In the very next verse, 88:10, it says, "Do you accomplish amazing things for the dead? Do the departed spirits rise up and give you thanks?" See that, and that's prophesying what was going to come at the deliverance of the departed souls, or those that had died outside of the sacrifice of Jesus. 88:11, is your loyal love proclaimed in the grave, or your faithfulness in the place of the dead? Are your amazing deeds experienced in the dark region, or your deliverance in the land of oblivion? As for me, I cry out to you, O Lord. In the morning, my prayer confronts you. O Lord, why do you reject me and pay no attention to me? And we know that at one point, even on the cross, that he turned, that God had to turn his view away from Jesus, could not look upon him. I am oppressed and have been on the verge of death since my youth. I have been subjected to your horrors, and I am numb with pain. Your anger overwhelms me. Your terrors destroy me. They surround me like water all day long. They join forces and encircle me. You cause my friends and neighbors to keep their distance. Those who know me leave me alone in the darkness. So, Yelena, yes, I do. As we just kind of touched on that, the only reason I went through it is because it does pertain to what we're going to talk about with hell and Hades and Sheol. And so, yes, I do fully believe that is talking about Jesus. So a couple things on whether or not, or I guess where the concept of going down to hell, did Jesus go to hell? So that actually comes from, hi, Elena. I'm glad you're on here. Sorry, I'm just seeing the comments coming up now. Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you made it back for that answer. As we go ahead, and now we're going to hit the other question you asked. So pertaining to whether or not, right? Okay, back on topic. Did he go to hell? So this concept actually comes from, really started with the Apostolic Creed, which was written in the 5th century. So in the Apostolic Creed, it says that he descended into hell and that he rose up. However, that is not accurate with what we find in the Greek and in the Hebrew. There's a distinct difference, very distinct difference between Sheol, which is in the Hebrew, and Hades in the Greek, which are both, by definition, it's the place of the dead or the place of departed souls. So it's essentially a holding ground. And we do find in Luke 16 that it talks about there being 2 places in Sheol or in Hades. And you have one which later on in Luke, I believe it's in Luke 24, when Jesus talks to, or says, "This day you'll be with me in paradise," we do see that what is also known as Abraham's bosom is a place of comfort. Okay, when you think about that, it's not necessarily with or in the presence of God in the same way that we later hear, to no longer be in the body is to be present with the Lord. It's not the same thing, but it is a place of comfort. Whereas on the other side of the chasm, that is a place of, it's clearly a place of separation from God, where honestly, I mean, we can't even fathom what it would be like to have no life, to have no light, to have no warmth of God, like anywhere. Like, no matter how evil the world is, as long as we are here and as long as the Holy Spirit's here, there's still hope in this world. And so there's a place where it is separation from all hope, completely and utterly. And it is, I mean, you can't even really comprehend what that would be like. And so this is a place separated from God, but yet not having gone through the judgment and been sentenced to the lake of fire. Now we start to see the difference laid out when we look at Acts 2, starting in verse 23. So let me go ahead and go back over to that. All right. So starting in verse 23, and we're going to be going through verse 33. Yeah. This man who was handed over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you executed by nailing him to the cross at the hands of the Gentiles. Now, this is obviously speaking of Jesus. But God raised him up, having released him from the pains of death, because it was not possible for him to be held in its power. For David says about him, I saw the Lord always in front of me, for he is at my right hand, so that I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart was glad, and my tongue rejoiced. My body also will live in hope, because you will not leave my soul in Hades, nor permit your Holy One to experience decay. Now notice here in Acts 2:27, it says, I'll leave my soul in Hades. Now, that is the same thing that is said in the Hebrew. It's Sheol, not Hades, but it's the same place. Now, why is it that we tend to get hell from this? A lot of Christians believe that it's talking about hell. A big part of that is because the King James, unfortunately, look, there is, for those of you that are King James only, I hate to tell you, but Paul did not write in the King James, okay? I've actually been told that. Paul, the poor guy was absolutely serious, but he said that Paul wrote in the King James. So that's not the case, all right? The King James is a translation into English from the primary language, just like any other English translation. When we go back to the original language, we receive much more insight. And the King James tends to translate Hades and Sheol, both in the Old Testament and the New, as hell. And then when we look in the Greek, we find that there's actually other words that pertain to that. So the King James would actually translate this as, would not abandon my soul or leave my soul in hell, nor permit the Holy One to experience decay. Most modern translations have changed that and accurately translate this as Hades, because there is a distinct difference between Hades and hell. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and just read this through for context. Back in verse 28, you have made known to me the paths of life. You will make me full of joy with your presence. Brothers, I can speak confidently to you about our forefather David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. So then, because he was a prophet and knew that God had sworn to him with an oath to seat one of his descendants on his throne, David, by foreseeing this, spoke about the resurrection of the Christ, that he was neither abandoned to Hades, nor did his body experience decay. This Jesus God raised up, and we are all witnesses of it. Okay, so again, he emphasizes the fact that he was raised up out of Hades. This is all referencing Psalm 16, 10 through 11. And you can go and read it there. But that's just what he's quoting there. Now, hell, on the other hand, is Gehenna, or the lake of fire. And those are that is the eternal separation from God, and a place of torment, eternal torment and suffering. It was a place that was never created for man. It was a place that was created for the devil and his angels. And it's a place that I believe that nobody occupies, because the judgment hasn't happened yet. When we look at Revelation 20, 10 through 15, it says, I got to get used to the fact that I can let you guys see this. All right. And so we have, and the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet are too. And they will be tormented there day and night forever and ever. Okay. So, just because this has come up before, just dispelling it, there's no annihilationism. Okay. You're not going to just cease to exist because what we see following this verse is the result of those that choose to reject Christ. And it clearly says in verse 10 that they will be tormented there day and night forever and ever. It's not a burnt up, cease to exist. It is a eternal torment. So in verse 11, then I saw a large white throne, and the one who was seated on it. The earth and the heaven fled from his presence, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne. Then the books were open, and another book was open, the book of life. So the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to their deeds. The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each one was judged according to his deeds. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, that person was thrown into the lake of fire. All right, so location, location, location. It is all the same. Yes. So, okay. So Kathy points out that her Bible does say hell, where I was talking about that before, and that's absolutely right. As she says, she has the King James. So when you're reading the King James, it's absolutely going to refer to Hades, Sheol, and Gehenna all as hell, which can be confusing, but thank you, God, that we have access to technology, concordances, and we have an obligation before God to utilize those properly and to be diligent in our study, just as the Bereans were. So what I want to note here, though, is that so there are 3 locations of the dead. And I think I believe this is referring to dispensations. Okay, so it says that the sea gave up its dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them. The sea, from my studies and what I believe, I think it's referring to actually those who died in the flood, Noah's flood, that are being held, and then you have those that are held in death, which you have I believe that's referring to those who have died after Christ overcame Hades, and then those who died in the law and chose to reject it and are currently still bound in prison in Hades. So you have 3 different locations that the death are going to be given up at the time of judgment. Now, when we get there, we're going to be witness to all of it. We're going to be there. So we'll see exactly how this plays out, exactly where they come from, exactly how this all plays out. But we know that when they're given up, then they're judged. If their names are not found, then they're thrown into the lake of fire. So ultimately, I stand by the fact that hell is not currently occupied, but it will be, right? So that hopefully answers the first question, which did take a little bit more. Oh, you know what? Actually, there's one more thing I did want to hit on that. So Ephesians 4, 7 through 13. In verse 8, it says, therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he captured captives and he gave gifts to men. Now, this is preceding when he goes in to talk about the fivefold as the gifts given to the body for the training up of the saints into the unity of faith. And just above it, at the beginning of Ephesians 4, it's also emphasizing unity. And, a lot of people believe that the descending and ascending that's what this is referring to. Regardless, we know that he did go and descend. Whether this is talking about actually leading captives free from there, or whether it's talking about leading those in bondage to sin, which was all of us, free. Either way, we know that the freedom is for all who choose to believe in him. Okay. And I know a lot of people will reference Ephesians 4, specifically referring to him descending into hell. And the amazing thing is that if you continue in Revelation 1, I believe it's Revelation 1, Jesus says that I'm the one that holds the keys to death and Hades, right? So we know that he has overcome. He has overcome all of that. He's overcome. He is the risen king. It also says there in Revelation 1 that he's the one that was dead but now lives. And that is the promise that we have in him. Let's see. Someone told me. Okay, so someone told me that they went to hell because they had unforgiveness. Don't know if that was true. That's hard to say. Unforgiveness for what? It could be any number of things, and it's Scripture does say that to the level that you judge, you'll be judged. That's one of the reasons why it's dangerous for us to hold people in unforgiveness. We're supposed to forgive. Now, if we walk a life where we constantly hold unforgiveness for people, we can't release that. It's hard for me to say that there is a significant heart change for that person in that. I can't say one way or the other that they would go to hell. God sees their heart and knows really what's going on, but unforgiveness is not a place we're called to walk in. It's the complete opposite. And so I can't say that you can truly walk in a place of unforgiveness of people throughout your whole life and be good with God. And so like anybody that I meet where that's a thing I see, it's immediately, put that off, get alone with God and realize how much he forgave you for. Because if there's a parable that talks about it, and I think it's probably one of the best warnings we have. It's like you're a servant, you go before God, you owe a great debt. He forgives all of it. And then you go to another servant, a servant who has a lesser debt owed to you, and you hold him up and you refuse to let him go. You refuse to forgive him when you've been forgiven so much. And it says that servant was then dragged before God, and him and his entire family were cast into prison until they could repay the debt in its entirety. So pertaining to unforgiveness, like that is a very serious warning that Jesus gives in that parable, that, we cannot walk in a place of unforgiveness and be good with God, right? So if there's somebody that's walking in that, if somebody's dealing with that, and you have access to speak into their life, like encourage them to get right with God and to clean that up, because he forgave them a great, great debt. So we're going to go ahead and move into the next question. And that is, if God is all perfect, could God have created a world without evil? So simply put, the answer is yes, and he did. We go back to Genesis 1, the entirety of Genesis 1. And 5 times in Genesis 1, as he's going through creation each day, 5 different times he says, and he looked upon all creation and it was good. It was good. It wasn't, okay, well, maybe one day with a little grace, it'll be. No, it was good. It was pleasing to God, right? Now, you have to realize that 1 John 1:5, that it says, now this is the gospel message which we have heard from him and announced to you. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. Right? God cannot. Seed replicates after its own kind. God is all good. He replicated all good. So, sorry, distraction, comments. So if God's all good and all seed reproduces after its own kind, then we know that God would have reproduced good because he is good. Furthermore, we know that God doesn't he doesn't purposely use evil. Like he didn't go out to start using evil. In James 1:13 and 14, it says, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each one is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires." So when God created everything, he created it all good. Matter of fact, when he gets to the end, when he creates man and he finishes all creation, he steps back. And that's the one time he actually says that he looked upon all of creation and it was very good. The other 4 times he says just good. That word there for very can also mean wholly or completely. In its entirety, it is good. So there was nothing evil in it. There was nothing bad in it. It was 100% wholly good. Now, one of the things that we have to grab hold of and realize is that, and this is moving into the next question, but it's okay. If God created everything good, then why does evil exist? Well, unfortunately, that is actually answered in the last verse I read, which was James 1:13 through 14, to a great extent. And it's verse 14 specifically, but each one is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires. So God didn't want robots. He could have created us to be robotic. He could have created us to where we don't really have a choice, right? Where, we worship him, we do what's right, and that's it. The thing is that the people that are pushing that and questioning that, they're like, oh, if God was all good and all powerful, then there wouldn't be any evil. And it's like, okay, why don't you serve God? Oh, well, I don't want to. I want to do what I want to do. I want to go and, I want to get drunk. I want to go and sleep around. I want to go do whatever it is. So their desire is not to serve God. Their desire is to do whatever they want. But yet what they're saying is that if God existed, that they would want God to force them to serve him. Doesn't make any sense. It goes against their own nature. And that's because they have been given free will. That's what God gave us. It's interesting that he says that everything was good 5 times. 5 is the number of grace. And when you multiply 5 by 5, that's 25. It's grace upon grace. So even from the very beginning, when God spoke that everything was good, he spoke that it was good 5 times. He spoke prophetically grace on us from the very beginning of creation, because he knew that we had to have free will in order to actually come to him, to actually love him the way he loves us, right? We got to remember that God is love. Was it 1 John 4:8? So it says that God is love, and love does not seek its own, per 1 Corinthians 13. So if love doesn't seek its own and God is love, then that means God is seeking the benefit of another. So he created us in order to fulfill his nature, that is love. And he wanted those that he could pour out his blessings on, pour out his love on, pour out his just everything that is good in him on us. And in turn, that we would worship him, that we would come to him. And for him to force us to come to him is not love. It's, you want to think about how twisted and ridiculous that concept is. It's like, okay, so, if somebody goes and, there's a ministry that I partner with, that they do a lot of rescues for sex trafficking and young women and stuff around the world. And a lot of those girls have been kidnapped and they're forced into prostitution. They're forced into brothels and stuff. And it's like, if you were to kidnap somebody and force them into relationship with you, is that love at all? How can we say that is wrong? How can we in our mind look at that and be like, no, that's twisted, it's screwed up, but then say, oh, our God should be that way? You see how sick and just twisted that whole train of thought is? God wanted us to be agents of free will, that we would choose him. And the way that he chose us and loves us, that we would choose him and love him. And so evil doesn't exist because God wanted it there. God created everything perfect. We messed it up. It's simple as that. Evil exists now because we succumb to our desires. If the world desired God, evil would cease to exist. But that's not the case. The world desires evil. We loosed that in the world. And God, in his mercy and grace, has already put into a plan of redemption, and has already walked through everything to restore that in this world, to restore that in us. Romans 3, and then in Psalm somewhere, it talks about the fact that not one was righteous, not one person. No one is. Let's go over to Romans. All right, so Romans 3:10. Just as it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. Together they have become worthless. There is no one who shows kindness, not even one. Their throats are open graves. They deceive with their tongues. The poison of asps is under their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery are in their paths, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. So we see there that was the reality that we lived in. That was our reality outside of Christ, outside of his redemptive plan for us, outside of his grace that he prophesied in Genesis 1, saying that there would be grace upon grace, that his plan would redeem us, his plan would reconcile us. And so evil exists because we have a God who wants to love us and wants us to love him. But he's not going to manipulate or force us to do it. And that's, that kind of weighs in on that. There's some vessels that are created for honor and dishonor. It's like, did he create them specifically to go to hell? No, I don't believe that's the case at all. But he knew that there would be vessels of dishonor, that there would be vessels that wouldn't serve him, that would reject him outright. And the interesting thing is that, a vessel can't change itself, but God can. So it's not, you don't like where you're at, you don't like where you're living, you don't like the situation, the condition that you have, you don't like being controlled by evil, change it. Go to God. Let him change you. Let it start with him. Put your eyes on Jesus and let him transform you into something good, into something new, into something worthy. Because that's what he promises he would do. It says that we're the righteousness of God in Christ. So Romans 3 says not one was righteous, but through Jesus, we are made righteous. So I hope that answers those questions. I know there are so many more out there. Yeah. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, in this way death spread to all people because all sinned. Good verse, Othniel. Thank you very much, sir. All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. And next week, well, we'll let it be a surprise who's going to do it next week. But we're gonna be back next Wednesday at 12:15. Remember to go ahead and submit those comments on Sunday when we do the post. You can submit the comments as far as what questions you have. If you would rather submit it privately, I know some people feel like their questions are dumb. There's no dumb questions. The only dumb question is the one not asked. But if you don't want to ask your question publicly, you can go ahead and select the link that's on there, and you can actually submit the question privately. And we do receive those, and we will be glad to address whatever questions come our way. So thank you all. God bless you guys, and we'll see you next week.